This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can visit their store by using my referral link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Nitsahone, and it's Monday, and that means it's time for another MTG Top 10, the series where I rank cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition. One of my goals is eventually, with these MTG Top 10s, to cover every single set, and today we're looking at another set, in particular, Betrayers of Kamigawa. Last week I looked at Champions of Kamigawa, and a few months ago I looked at Saviors of Kamigawa, so this will officially finish up our look at Kamigawa block, and it's a great time to be doing that, with Kamigawa Neon Dynasty coming out soon. Kamigawa block is often thought of as a weak one, but the other two videos I've already done on the block, especially the one on Champions of Kamigawa, show that that isn't really supported by evidence. Champions especially was a hugely powerful and influential set, and the other two sets in the block are perfectly respectable. Now that said, Betrayers of Kamigawa is not nearly as powerful as Champions was, but we're still going to see a lot of cards in this video that have had a long-term impact on competitive Magic. To be eligible for this video, a card had to receive its original printing in Betrayers of Kamigawa, and all that means there are 159 cards eligible to appear in this video, and we'll take a look at the 10 of those that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. Before we get started, here's a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. A first-tier top 8 is worth 2 points, and this includes events like Pro Tours and Set Championships, and a second-tier top 8 is worth 1 point, and this includes events like Grand Prix and Magic Online Challenges. Alright, let's get to the list. At number 10, it's Final Judgment. This is a 6-mana Wrath effect that exiles all creatures. 2 mana for that minor exile upgrade is pretty steep, but in Kamigawa block constructed, it was one of the most played cards around, especially because there wasn't access to another board sweeper in the format. There was only one Kamigawa block Pro Tour, and 5 of the top 8 decks ran Final Judgment. However, it was outclassed in other formats and has never gained any points since 2005, and there are some cards behind it that are very likely to put up more points, like Disrupting and Nourishing Shoal, but for now, the Judgment holds on to the number 10 spot on this list. At number 9, it is Goryo's Vengeance. This instant can reanimate a legendary creature for only 2 mana. Now, the creature you reanimate does get exiled at the end step, but that's still a pretty great deal, especially when you reanimate something that has a massive impact on the game from just being on the table for that short of a time. In Standard, it was played in Greater Good decks, where you could reanimate a big legendary creature like Kokusho, attack with it, and then sacrifice it to the enchantment, in which case you would get absurd amounts of value and really pressure your opponent. For a long time, that one top 8 in Kamigawa Standard was all that Goryo's Vengeance had, but then around 2014, modern decks featuring the Vengeance began to put up some good finishes. This deck, often called Griselbrand, featured a ton of powerful legendary creatures like Griselbrand. The deck also featured Through the Breach, which was extra fun because both of these spells have Splice onto Arcane, which means that you can staple the effect onto one of your other cards without actually using up the card. The shoal part of the name comes from fellow Arcane spell and Betrayers of Kamigawa card Nourishing Shoal, which could be used to gain you massive amounts of life. With 9 points, Nourishing Shoal barely missed out on this list. Another sweet thing about Vengeance is you can actually use it to reanimate Emrakul the Aeon's Torn. Because Vengeance is an instant, you can cast it in response to Emrakul's trigger that would normally shuffle it into your library, and paying 2 mana to get back Emrakul for a turn is an amazing deal. Anyway, the Vengeance has pretty consistently been featured in a variety of Reanimator decks in Modern since 2014, and it looks like that's likely to continue. At number 8, it is Hokkori Dust. It has the same number of points as Goryo's Vengeance, but has more Pro Tour top 8, so it got the higher slot. Hokkori really locks down lands on the board, only allowing players to untap a single land each turn. The Dust Drinker was featured as a sideboard card in Kamigawa block constructed, and it was at its nastiest in Standard, where it could be used alongside Glare of Subdual and Ghazi Glare decks. If you have several creatures, Hokkori and Glare of Subdual, you can pretty much entirely lock your opponent out of the game until you kill them, and that's pretty nasty. While it found success in both block and Standard, it hasn't done anything since 2005, and it's another card that could fall off of this list in the not-too-distant future. At number 7, it is Kira, Great Glass Spinner, a 3-mana 2/2 flyer that makes it a lot harder for your opponent to kill your creatures with spot removal. Kira makes it so that the first spell or ability that targets one of your creatures every turn gets countered. This means that typically if your opponent wants to kill one of your creatures with a targeted removal spell, they have to 2-for-1 themselves. And in the meantime, Kira can put her evasive status to good use by attacking your opponent. Kind of surprisingly, Kira was not played at all in block, standard, or extended, but it has taken hold in the non-rotating formats. It gained all of its points from tribal decks in them, in spirit decks in Modern and Vintage, and in Merfolk decks in Modern and Legacy. She continues to be fairly active in Modern and is likely to gain more points going forward. At number 6, it is Inkais, Servant of Oni. Ninjas were one of the coolest things about Kamigawa last time, so I'm glad we're seeing them again in Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. Anyway, Inkais has a very powerful Saboteur trigger that lets you reanimate an opponent's creature. Because of ninjutsu, this was easier to accomplish than it might look at first, and even though you return the original attacker to your hand, you're probably getting 5 mana worth of value out of ninjutsuing Inkais into play. That was even more true if you returned a creature with an Enter the Battlefield ability to your hand, and to top it all off, Inkais can also regenerate, which means even without ninjutsu, she can attack pretty much every turn and threaten to reanimate something, since she probably isn't going to die in combat. She gained all of her points in Kamigawa Block Constructed and Standard in 2005. At number 5, it is Sickening Shoal. It's part of a cycle of shoals, all of which are X spells that can turn into pitch spells. In other words, you can exile a card from your hand rather than pay mana for them, and the mana value of the card you discard affects what the spell does. In the case of Sickening Shoal, you can give -X to a creature, where X is equal to the mana value of the card you exiled. So, yeah, this can be a free spell, and that's always powerful. The other shoals all have points too, but this is the only card from the cycle that actually made it to this list. As I said, both Disrupting and Nourishing Shoal narrowly missed the list, and I would imagine if I revisit this list in a few years, that will change. Sickening Shoal saw a little bit of play in block, but most of its points have actually come in Magic's most powerful format, Vintage, where it's a common sideboard and occasional main deck card in Dredge and Bazaar aggro decks. These decks run somewhere between 0 and 2 mana producing lands, so a free spell like the Shoal that lets you interact with the opponent's creatures for 0 mana is pretty important. It's going to continue to see play in Vintage going forward. At number 4, it is Tendo Icebridge, a land that can produce mana of any color, though it can usually only do it once, since it needs charge counters to do it. In Kamigawa Block Constructed, the bridge played a large role because it was largely a format made up of decks with 3 or more colors, and 7 of the top 8 decks at the Kamigawa Block Pro Tour ran this. It also saw some play in Standard and Extended, but Modern has actually been its most frequent home, where it's been prominently featured in combo decks that play multiple colors and are really only interested in producing colored mana a single time. Bloom Titan used to be where it saw the most play, and then Krark's Clan Ironwork decks. Unfortunately for the bridge, both of those decks were nerfed by bans, and Tendo Icebridge hasn't gained a single point since 2018. That said, it's a land that can produce mana of any color, and it always has a chance at gaining more points. At number 3, it is Ninja of the Deep Hours, which is probably my personal favorite card in the entire set. When this ninja hits the opponent, you get to draw a card, and because it has ninjutsu, it isn't that hard to make that happen. It can net you a ton of cards if left unchecked. While it has gained a few points in Standard, Modern, and Legacy over the years, it's done the most work in Pauper, where it's pretty close to being a blue staple. It's gained points there in Fairy Tribal decks, Blue-Red Snow decks, Mono-Blue Delver, Dimir Control, and the so-called Deep Hours aggro. These decks all utilize creatures with Enter the Battlefield abilities who are also evasive, like Spell Stutter Sprite, and if you ninjutsu one of those back to your hand, you can end up netting 2 cards instead of just 1. It's also worth talking about the Ninja in Legacy, where a Ninja Tribal deck emerged in 2020 as a result of Modern Horizons, which featured several new ninjas and ninja payoffs, like Ingenious Infiltrator, which in a lot of ways gives the deck a better version of Ninja of the Deep Hours to run alongside it. This ninja is likely to gain more points in both Legacy and Pauper going forward. At number 2, it's Threads of Disloyalty, an aura that lets you steal an opponent's creature provided it has a mana value of 2 or less. Stealing an opponent's creature is among the most powerful things you can do in this game. This is because you effectively cast a removal spell that then gives you a creature, and that's some serious power. And sure, this one is somewhat restrictive in what it can steal, but 3 mana to steal a creature is a great deal. This is especially true in formats with powerful creatures who have low mana values. In Modern, for example, it frequently steals Tarmogoyf, Young Pyromancer, and Ragavan, among other things. Threads has been played a ton over the years, and that's going to continue, as there will always be formats with powerful things you can steal with it. And at number 1, it is Umazawas GTA. This probably was really obvious to you, provided you knew that the GTA was from this set in particular. This is, arguably, the best equipment ever printed. The GTA gains charge counters when the creature it's equipped to does damage, and you can then cash in those charge counters for one of 3 abilities. You can use them to pump your creature, you can use them to weaken and frequently kill your opponent's creature, and you can use them to gain life. One of the nasty things about the Jite is its controller can just sit around accumulating counters and really put you in a bad spot because they have 3 different fairly impactful effects that they can use at any time. What's more is it doesn't actually have to be equipped to something to use those abilities, which means you can offer up trades where you're always going to come out ahead. As a result of all this power, Umazawa's Jite has been a multi-format all-star, achieving success in most formats and decks that run lots of creatures, since they are necessary, of course, to power the Jite. In block, standard, and extended, this meant it was primarily featured in aggro decks. The Jite caused extended to become way too homogeneous because it was colorless and every deck could run it, so when the modern format was created in 2011, it was put on the preemptive ban list, and it remains there to this day, and as a result, modern is the only format where it doesn't have any points. However, the Jite has gone on to amazing success in Legacy, where it's usually featured in decks running Stoneforge Mystic, since she can search up the powerful equipment whenever you think you might need it. The most popular homes for it have been Death and Taxes and Stoneblade. The Jite has even found success in Vintage, where it has been featured in Eldrazi Aggro and Ravager Shops decks. Umazawa's Jite will continue to put up points going forward, and I feel fairly confident in saying that it will never lose its spot on this list. Well, those are the 10 cards from Betrayers of Kamigawa that have made the biggest impact on competitive Magic. While not quite as impressive as Champions of Kamigawa, Betrayers did contribute several things that continue to have relevance today, including Umazawa's Jite, Threads of Disloyalty, Ninja of the Deep Hours, Kira the Great Glass Spinner, and Goryo's Vengeance. If you want to own any of these Betrayers of Kamigawa cards, you can find direct Card Kingdom links for each of them in the description. If you want to make sure you catch future MTG Top 10s, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. If you want to catch up on past MTG Top 10s, including more that look at specific sets, you should see some playlists on your screen shortly. Lastly, if you want to go the extra mile in supporting me and the channel, you can do that on Patreon. Thanks for watching.